Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and felt his boots touch the metal floor of Kepler 7 station. The air tasted different here, recycled and clean in a way that Earth air never was. He pulled his single bag over his shoulder and looked. Around at the massive space station that would be his home for the next 3 years, the station stretched out in all directions, bigger than any city Jake had ever seen. Through the clear walls, he could see stars scattered across the darkness of space like tiny diamonds. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked at various ports, each one strange and beautiful in its own way. Jake had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that he was here, he felt small and out of place. He was one of only 3 humans ever accepted into the Galactic University of Xenobiology. The other 2 had dropped out within their first semester, unable to handle the pressure. And strange environment. A mechanical voice spoke from speakers in the ceiling. Dr. Jake Morrison, please report to Registration Bay 7 for orientation processing. Jake followed the glowing arrows on the floor through corridors filled with beings he had only seen in textbooks. A group of tall, crystal-like creatures glided past him, their bodies catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns on the walls. These were Zephyrians, he knew, beings of living mineral who communicated through sound vibrations that made music when they spoke. Near a food court, he spotted several Aquarians floating in mobile water tanks. Their tentacles moved in graceful patterns as they ate something that looked like glowing seaweed. One of them noticed Jake staring and quickly swam to the far side of its tank. Clearly nervous around the human dot at Registration Bay 7, Jake met his first Chitauri up close. The insect-like being stood behind a curved desk, its forearms working at different control panels, while its compound eyes tracked Jake's approach. When it spoke, its voice came from a translation device around its neck. "You are the human," it said, not really a question. Dr. Morrison from the death world called Earth. "That's right," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm here for the xenobiology program." The Chitauri's mandibles clicked together in what Jake hoped was not a threatening gesture. "I am Registrar Clixon. Your species has a reputation that precedes you. 2 previous humans failed to complete even basic coursework. The administration wonders if this 3rd attempt is wise." Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks, but kept his voice calm. "I graduated top of my class at Montana State. I've spent 8 years studying predator behavior in the field. I think I can handle classroom work. Field work on a death world is considerably different from academic study among civilized species," Clixon replied. The insect handed Jake a data pad and several small devices. "These are your room assignment, class schedule, and translation equipment. Try not to terrify your classmates." Jake's room was small but comfortable, with a window that looked out into space. He spent his first night reading about his fellow students and professors, trying to prepare himself for what was coming. The more he read, the more he understood why the other humans had struggled. Every other species in the university came from what they called garden worlds, planets where life was easy and cooperation was the key to survival. They had never known hunger, predators, or real danger. To them, Earth was a nightmare world where everything tried to kill everything else. His first class was Advanced Predator Studies with Professor Veltar, a Zephyrian who had written several books about dangerous species. Jake arrived early and took a seat in the back of the classroom, hoping to avoid attention. The other students filed in slowly, their conversation stopping when they noticed Jake. He heard whispers in various languages, picked up by his translation device. "Is that the human? From the death world? I heard his species eats other animals. My cousin said humans have killed their own kind in wars. Why would the university let such a creature study here?" Professor Veltar entered the room like a living piece of art. Her crystal body caught the light and threw it around the room in shifting patterns of blue and green. When she spoke, her voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Students, we have a new addition to our class today. Dr. Morrison comes to us from Earth, which, as you know, is classified as a Class 12 death world." She paused, letting this information sink in. "I trust you will all make him feel welcome while maintaining appropriate safety protocols." Jake felt every eye in the room turn to him. A small luminary student, whose body was made of pure energy contained in a special suit, actually dimmed when it looked at him. One of the Aquarians made a sound like a whale's call that his translator interpreted as, "Oh no, oh no." "Dr. Morrison," Professor Veltar said, her musical voice taking on a slightly sharper tone. "Perhaps you could tell the class about your background?" Jake stood up, feeling awkward under all the stares. "I'm a wildlife biologist from Montana. I've spent most of my career studying large predators in their natural habitats. Bears, mountain lions, wolves. I'm interested in how predator-prey relationships worked in different environments." A Zephyrian student raised one of her crystalline arms. "Dr. Morrison, when you say you study these predators, do you mean from a safe distance using remote observation equipment?" "Sometimes," Jake replied. "But often I work in the field, tracking animals, observing their behavior up close. I've been charged by grizzly bears, stalked by mountain lions, and surrounded by wolf packs. The key is understanding their behavior and responding appropriately." The classroom fell silent. Jake could hear the quiet hum of the station's life, support systems, and the soft bubbling from the Aquarian tanks. "You have been in physical proximity to active predators?" asked a Shatari student, its mandibles clicking rapidly. "Creatures that could kill you?" "Many times," Jake said. "Last year, I spent 3 months following a pack of wolves through Yellowstone. I had to earn their trust slowly, prove I wasn't a threat. Eventually, they accepted me as part of their territory." One of the Aquarians made a sound that came through the translator as impossible. Another whispered, "No wonder they call it a death world." Professor Valtar's light patterns shifted to what Jake was learning, meant surprise or confusion. "Dr. Morrison, are you suggesting that you have successfully interacted with apex predators without protective technology?" "Yes, ma'am. The key is understanding their behavior, their communication methods, and their motivations. Most predators don't want to fight unless they have to. They're looking for easy meals, not dangerous confrontations. But these creatures you describe," said a luminary student, whose voice came through speakers in its containment suit, "they are designed to kill. How does one negotiate with a killing machine?" Jake smiled, thinking of the grizzly bear he had encountered just months before leaving Earth. The massive creature had stood on its hind legs, towering over him, but Jake had recognized the behavior as curiosity rather than aggression. "They're not killing machines," he said. "They're intelligent animals trying to survive in their environment. Bears don't wake up thinking about killing humans. They wake up thinking about finding food, protecting their cubs, and avoiding unnecessary risks. If you understand what they want and what they fear, you can predict their behavior." The students exchanged looks that Jake couldn't interpret. Professor Veltar's crystalline body had taken on a reddish tint that he suspected meant she was not pleased with his answers. "Dr. Morrison," she said carefully, "while your experiences are undoubtedly fascinating, I hope you understand that academic study requires a more scientific approach than survival instincts." "Of course," Jake replied. "That's why I'm here. I want to learn how the principles I've observed on Earth apply to predator species throughout the galaxy." As the class continued, Jake noticed the other students keeping their distance from him. When they worked in groups, he was left alone. During the break, conversations stopped when he approached. By the end of the first day, Jake realized that his reputation as a Deathworlder was going to be harder to overcome than he had expected. That evening, Jake sat in his room, looking out at the stars, and wondering if he had made a mistake. The other humans had quit, unable to handle the isolation and suspicion. Maybe they had been smarter than he was. But then he thought about the wolves in Yellowstone, how they had eventually accepted him into their world. It had taken patience, understanding, and time. Maybe his fellow students were not so different from those wolves. They just needed to learn that he was not a threat. Jake opened his datapad and began preparing for tomorrow's classes. He had come too far to give up now. Word spread quickly through Kepler 7 station about the human professor who claimed he could talk to predators. Within a week, Jake Morrison had become the most talked about being on the entire university campus. Students from other departments came to peek into his classrooms. Faculty members whispered about him in the corridors. Jake tried to focus on his studies, but the attention made everything harder. When he walked into the dining hall, conversation stopped. When he sat down to eat, the tables around him emptied. The food dispensers had been programmed with Earth-safe options, but even eating what looked like normal vegetables made the other students nervous. "Look at how he tears his food," whispered an Aquarian student to her friend, watching Jake eat. A salad. Such violence, even with plants. Jake pretended not to hear, but each comment made him feel more isolated. He started eating in his room to avoid the stares and whispers. Dr. Creason, the head of the xenobiology department, was a Chitauri who had built his reputation by being the most careful and methodical researcher in the university. His compound eyes missed nothing, and his forearms allowed him to take notes faster than any other professor. He had published more papers than anyone else in his field, and he did not like the attention that Jake was getting. 3 weeks into the semester, Dr. Creason called Jake to his office. The room was designed for a Chitauri, with multiple workstations, at different heights and lighting that made Jake's human eyes water. Dr. Creason worked at 3 different computers while talking to Jake, his mandibles clicking with each word. "Dr. Morrison," he said without looking up from his screens, "your presence here has created quite a stir among the students and faculty." "I'm just trying to do my coursework, sir," Jake replied, shifting uncomfortably in the chair that was too small for his human frame. "Yes, well, your coursework includes some rather extraordinary claims." Dr. Creason finally turned to face Jake, all 4 of his eyes focusing on the human. "You have told your classmates that you have personally interacted with apex predators. You have suggested that dangerous species can be managed through understanding rather than technology. That's correct, sir. I've spent years developing those techniques." Dr. Creason's endibles clicked faster, which Jake was learning meant the Chitauri was either excited or annoyed. "Dr. Morrison, we are an institution of learning, not a circus. Academic study requires proof, not stories about adventures on Deathworlds." Jake felt his temper rising, but kept his voice calm. "I have documentation of my fieldwork. Video recordings, research notes, published papers. Everything I've claimed can be verified." "Documentation from Earth sources," Dr. Creason said dismissively. "Created by and for Deathworld inhabitants. What we need is proof that your methods work in controlled scientific conditions." "What kind of proof?" Dr. Creason leaned back in his chair, and Jake caught what might have been a smile on the alien's face. "A demonstration? If your theories about predator management are correct, you should be able to apply them to any predator species, not just those from your home world." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What did you have in mind?" "The university maintains a research facility on the lower levels of the station. We keep various species there for study. Some are quite dangerous." Dr. Creason pulled up a holographic display showing a creature that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. The thing on the screen stood 8 feet tall and looked like someone had crossed a panther with a dragon. Its body was covered in natural armor that gleamed like black metal. Its eyes glowed with an intelligence that was somehow more frightening than simple animal cunning. When it moved, even in the recorded footage, every muscle spoke of deadly power. "This is a Nexus stalker from Zerion Prime," Dr. Creason explained. "It is considered one of the most dangerous predators in known space. No sentient being has ever survived direct contact with one. They are studied only through remote observation and sealed barriers." Jake stared at the creature, his mind racing. Every instinct he had developed over years of fieldwork was screaming that this thing was dangerous, beyond anything he had ever encountered. But at the same time, he could see patterns in its movement, behaviors that suggested intelligence and purpose rather than mindless killing. "You want me to interact with that thing?" Jake asked. "I want you to prove that your Deathworld techniques work on a galactic scale," Dr. Creason replied. "If you can successfully manage a Nexus stalker using your methods, then perhaps your theories have merit. If not, then we will know that human claims are just primitive survival instincts dressed up as science." Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying the creature on the screen. He watched how it moved, how it positioned itself, how it reacted to different stimuli. There were patterns there, just like with the predators back on Earth. What would this demonstration involve exactly? Dr. Creason's mandibles clicked with what Jake now recognized as satisfaction. You would enter a controlled environment with a Nexus stalker. No weapons, no protective gear, no technological assistance. Just you and your understanding of predator behavior. If you can establish the kind of rapport you claim to have achieved with Earth predators, you will have proven your point. And if I can't, then your theories will be exposed as Deathworld mythology, and humans will be recognized as unsuitable for advanced xenobiological study. Jake felt the weight of the challenge settling on his shoulders. This was not just about him anymore. Every human who might want to study in galactic universities would be judged by what happened in that room with the Nexus stalker. When would this demonstration take place? 2 weeks from today. That should give you time to study the available footage and prepare your approach. The demonstration will be observed by faculty members from multiple departments. Given the nature of the test, we will also invite representatives from several member worlds. This will be a significant academic event. Jake nodded slowly. "I accept your challenge, Dr. Creason." The Chitauri's compound eyes gleamed. "Excellent. I will begin making arrangements immediately." As Jake left the office, he felt like he was walking in a dream. He had just agreed to enter a room with one of the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, armed with nothing but his understanding of animal behavior and his experience with Earth predators. Of the challenge spread through the university, faster than Jake thought possible. By the next morning, students were approaching him in the corridors, some offering encouragement, others clearly expecting him to back out before the demonstration. "Dr. Morrison," said Lucy Brennan, the only other human student at the university, catching up with him after his morning class. "You can't be serious about this. That thing will kill you." Lucy was a linguistics student, specializing in FIRST, contact communication protocols. She was small and quiet, and Jake had barely spoken to her before now. The fact that she was approaching him showed how serious the situation had become. "Maybe," Jake admitted, "but maybe not. I need to study the footage more carefully, but I think there might be patterns in its behavior that the other researchers have missed." "What kind of patterns?" Jake pulled up the holographic display on his datapad, showing Lucy the Nexus stalker. "Footage. Look at how it moves around its enclosure. See how it always keeps certain areas clear? And watch its reactions when the researchers change the lighting or temperature. It's not just responding to stimuli randomly. It's making decisions based on complex evaluation of its environment." Lucy watched the footage with him, her face pale. "Even if you're right, even if it's intelligent, that doesn't mean it won't kill you. Intelligence can make predators more dangerous, not less." "True," Jake said. But it also means there might be a way to communicate with it. Every intelligent species has some form of communication, some way of expressing basic concepts, like threat, submission, curiosity, and cooperation. Dr. Morrison, this isn't like the animals on Earth. This thing evolved on a completely different world, with different environmental pressures. You can't assume that your Earth techniques will work. Jake was quiet for a moment, watching the Nexus stalker pace in its enclosure. You're right. I can't assume anything. But I can observe, analyze, and try to understand. That's what I've always done. Word of the challenge reached Earth within days. Jake received messages from his former colleagues, his professors, and even his family, all begging him to reconsider. The scientific community on Earth was divided between those who thought he was crazy and those who thought he might actually have a chance. Dr. Sarah Martinez, his former advisor at Montana State, sent him a video message. Jake, I've seen you work with grizzlies and mountain lions, and I know you have skills that most people don't understand. But this is different. This is a creature that no one has ever successfully interacted with. Please think carefully about what you're risking. But Jake had already made his decision. He spent every free moment studying the Nexus stalker footage, taking notes on its behavior patterns, and developing theories about how it might communicate. He read every paper that had been written about the species, though most were based on remote observations and theoretical analysis. The more he studied, the more convinced he became that the Nexus stalker was not just a mindless killing machine. It showed signs of complex problem-solving abilities. The Nexus stalker arrived at Kepler-7 station 3 days before the demonstration. Jake watched from the observation deck as the heavily armored transport ship docked with the research facility. Even through the thick walls of the station, he could feel the vibrations as the massive creature was moved from the ship to its temporary holding area. The transport had required 6 different security clearances just to approach the station. The containment unit was built like a fortress, with energy barriers, reinforced walls, and emergency systems that could flood the entire area with knockout gas in seconds. Jake counted at least 20 security guards in full battle armor escorting the container through the station corridors. "Are you having second thoughts yet?" asked Lucy Brennan, who had been staying close to Jake ever since the challenge was announced. The small linguistics student had appointed herself as his unofficial assistant, though Jake suspected she was really there to talk him out of going through with the demonstration. Every day, Jake admitted, watching the security team disappear around a corner with their dangerous cargo. But backing out now wouldn't just end my career here. It would close the door for every human who might want to study at a galactic university. Lucy was quiet for a moment, then said, "Jake, can I ask you something? Why is this so important to you? I mean, really important?" Jake thought about the question as they walked back toward his quarters. "When I was 12 years old, I got lost in the woods during a family camping trip. I wandered around for 2 days, getting more scared and hungry. On the second night, I heard something big moving through the trees around my campsite. A bear? A wolf pack. 5 adults circling my little fire. I was terrified, but I didn't run. Something told me that running would make things worse. So I sat still and watched them. After a while, I noticed they weren't acting aggressive. They were curious. I started talking to them, just speaking softly, letting them know I wasn't a threat." Lucy stared at him. "What happened?" "They stayed with me all night. When the search and rescue team found me the next morning, the wolves were sleeping around my campsite like guard dogs. The rangers couldn't believe it. They said wolves don't behave that way around humans." "That's when you decided to study predators?" "That's when I realized that most of what people think they know about dangerous animals is wrong. Fear makes you see monsters where there might be allies, or at least neutral parties who just want to be left alone. They reached Jake's quarters, where he had set up his research station. The walls were covered with printouts of Nexus Stalker images, behavioral analysis charts, and notes written in his careful handwriting. Lucy looked around the room with amazement. "You really think you can figure out how to communicate with that thing in just 2 weeks?" "I have to try," Jake said, settling down at his desk. "Look at this footage from yesterday." He pulled up a video feed from the Nexus Stalker's holding area. The creature was pacing back and forth in its containment cell, but there was something rhythmic about its movement. Jake had been watching for patterns, and he was starting to see them. "Watch how it moves," Jake said, pointing at the screen. 3 steps to the left, pause. 2 steps to the right, pause, then it repeats the sequence. It's not random pacing. It's deliberate. Lucy leaned closer to the screen. Could it be some kind of communication? Like a distress signal? Maybe. Or it could be territorial marking behavior. Or a way of testing the barriers of its enclosure. The important thing is that it's thinking, planning, responding to its environment in a complex way. Jake had spent the past week watching every hour of available footage. The more he studied the Nexus Stalker, the more convinced he became that. Previous researchers had missed important details because they were too focused on the creature's reputation as a killer. "Look at this," Jake said, switching to another video. "This is from when they changed the lighting in its cell. Watch its reaction." On the screen, the Nexus Stalker immediately stopped pacing when the lights dimmed. It moved to a specific corner of the cell and crouched low, but its posture wasn't defensive. It looked more like it was listening or waiting for something. "It's not afraid of the dark," Jake observed. "It's using the darkness. See how its eyes change color? It's switching to night vision, but it's also positioning itself where it has the best view of all the entrances to its cell. That's actually pretty smart," Lucy admitted. "Exactly. This isn't a mindless monster. It's a tactical thinker. That changes everything about how I need to approach it." Jake had also been studying the planet where the Nexus Stalker came from. Zerion Prime was a harsh world with extreme weather patterns and multiple large predator species. For the Nexus Stalker to survive as an apex predator on such a world, it would need more than just physical strength. It would need intelligence, adaptability, and complex social behaviors. "I think the key is understanding what it wants," Jake said, making notes on his datapad. "Every predator has basic needs: food, safety, territory, and reproduction. If I can figure out which of those needs is driving its behavior, I might be able to establish some kind of common ground." Lucy picked up one of Jake's printed charts. "These symbols you've drawn, what are they?" "Possible communication markers. I've noticed that the Nexus Stalker makes specific sounds at certain times of day. Some of them might be random, but others seem to be responses to specific stimuli. I'm trying to build a basic vocabulary." Jake had identified at least 12 different vocalizations that the creature made regularly. Some were low rumbles that seemed to indicate contentment. Others were sharper sounds that appeared to be warnings or challenges. There was even what sounded like a questioning tone that the creature used when something in its environment changed. "Jake, even if you're right about all this, how are you going to test your theories without getting killed?" That was the question that kept Jake awake at night. All of his experience with Earth predators had taught him that first contact was the most dangerous moment. If he misread the creature's intentions or made the wrong initial approach, he would not get a second chance. "I've been thinking about that," Jake said. "The demonstration is supposed to take place in the main research arena. That's a controlled environment with emergency systems, but it's also unfamiliar territory for both of us. I think I need to spend some time with the creature before the demonstration." "You want to visit it in its cell?" "Not in the cell. That's its territory now. But I want to observe it directly, not just through cameras. I need to see how it reacts to my presence before I try to interact with it. The next morning, Jake requested permission to observe the Nexus Stalker from the secure observation chamber adjacent to its holding area. Dr. Creason granted the request, probably hoping that seeing the creature up close would convince Jake. To back out of the challenge, the observation chamber was separated from the creature's cell by 3 layers of reinforced barriers and an energy field that could stop a missile. Jake pressed his face to the viewing window and got his first direct look at the Nexus Stalker. It was even more impressive in person than in the videos. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, with muscles that moved like liquid metal under its armored hide. Its eyes were the most striking feature, glowing with an inner light that seemed to shift between gold and green, depending on the angle. But what struck Jake most was how the creature immediately noticed his presence. The moment he appeared at the viewing window, the Nexus Stalker stopped pacing and turned to look directly at him. For several long seconds, predator and human stared at each other across the barriers. Then the creature did something that made Jake's heart race. It tilted its head to one side, the same gesture of curiosity that Jake had seen in wolves, big cats, and even domestic dogs. It was studying him just as intently as he was studying it. Interesting, Jake whispered to himself. The Nexus Stalker moved closer to the barriers, not in an aggressive manner, but with the careful approach of an intelligent being investigating something new. It sniffed the air near the energy field, and Jake realized it was trying to catch his scent. Jake decided to try an experiment. He moved slowly to his left, keeping his eyes on the creature. The Nexus Stalker followed his movement, tracking him along the length of the viewing window. When Jake stopped, the creature stopped. When Jake raised his hand and placed it against the barrier, the creature approached and placed its own clawed hand opposite Jake's. "Lucy, are you getting this recorded?" Jake asked without taking his eyes off the creature. "Every second," Lucy replied from the control booth. "This is incredible, Jake. It's actually trying to interact with you." Jake spent the next 3 hours in the observation chamber, and the Nexus Stalker spent the entire time focused on him. The creature seemed to be studying Jake's movements, learning his patterns just as Jake was learning its patterns. By the end of the session, Jake was convinced that the Nexus Stalker was not just intelligent, but genuinely curious about him. It had shown no aggressive behavior, no territorial displays, no hunting instincts. Instead, it had exhibited the kind of cautious interest that Jake associated with first contact between social species. "I think it's lonely," Jake told Lucy as they left the observation area. "Lonely?" The main lecture hall had been transformed into something that looked more like a gladiator arena than a classroom. Protective barriers surrounded a central space where Jake would face the Nexus Stalker. Emergency systems lined the walls, ready to flood the area with knockout gas or energy fields at the first sign of trouble. Jake stood in the preparation room, looking at himself in the mirror. He wore simple clothes with no metal or synthetic materials that might trigger the creature's hunting instincts. In his pocket was a small device that could produce various tones and frequencies, the only tool he would be allowed to take into the demonstration space. "Last chance to back out," said Dr. Creason, who had come to escort Jake to the arena. The Chitauri's mandibles clicked with what Jake now recognized as nervous excitement. "No one would blame you for reconsidering." "I'm not backing out," Jake replied, checking the sound device one more time. "Is the creature already in position?" "It was moved to the demonstration chamber an hour ago." The transport was ... eventful. 3 security guards needed medical attention, though the creature never actually touched them. Their fear responses caused them to injure themselves trying to get away. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. If trained security professionals were panicking just from being near the Nexus Stalker, what kind of reception was he going to get? The corridor leading to the arena was lined with observation windows. As Jake walked past, he could see beings from dozens of different worlds watching his approach. Some looked excited, others terrified, and a few appeared to be taking bets on how long he would survive. Lucy Brennan was waiting at the entrance to the arena. Her face was pale, and Jake could see that she had been crying. "Jake, please don't do this. You don't have to prove anything to these people." "Yes, I do," Jake said softly. "Not just for me, but for every human who comes after me. For every species that gets labeled as too dangerous or too primitive to join the galactic community." The arena itself was larger than Jake had expected, about the size of a basketball court with a high ceiling. The walls were lined with energy barriers and emergency systems. In the center of the space was the Nexus Stalker's temporary containment unit, a cube of reinforced materials with one side that would open to release the creature. Jake could hear the representatives from various worlds talking in the observation areas above the arena. His translation device picked up fragments of conversation in dozens of languages. "Magnificent creature. Shame about the human. I give him 30 seconds before he runs. The Deathworlder has courage. I will grant him that. Courage and stupidity often look the same from the outside." Dr. Creason activated the arena's communication system. His voice echoed from speakers around the room. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, today we witness a test of xenobiological theory versus practical application. Dr. Jake Morrison of Earth claims that predator species can be managed through understanding and communication rather than technology and barriers." Jake stepped into the arena, and a hush fell over the observers. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching his every move. The weight of expectation and fear pressed down on him like a physical force. Dr. Morrison will now demonstrate his techniques. With a living Nexus Stalker, one of the most dangerous predators known to galactic science. He carries no weapons, no protective equipment, and no technological aids beyond a simple audio device. The containment unit began to open with a mechanical grinding sound that seemed to last forever. Jake positioned himself in the center of the arena, far enough from the barriers to show confidence, close enough to reach safety if everything went wrong. The Nexus Stalker emerged from its container like a shadow given form. In the bright lights of the arena, its armored hide gleamed like polished obsidian. Its eyes immediately fixed on Jake, and the creature's head tilted in that gesture of curiosity that Jake had observed during his preparation sessions. Several observers in the gallery screamed. One of the Aquarians fainted, and Jake heard the splash as it fell into its mobility tank. Even some of the security guards stationed around the arena took involuntary steps backward, but the Nexus Stalker ignored all of them. Its attention was focused entirely on Jake, who stood motionless in the center of the arena. For a long moment, human and alien predator regarded each other across 20 feet of empty space. Then the Nexus Stalker charged. The creature moved faster than anything Jake had ever seen, covering the distance between them in 3 powerful bounds. Its claws extended, its mouth opened to reveal rows of gleaming teeth, and its eyes blazed with predatory focus. Every instinct Jake possessed screamed at him to run, to dive for the protective barriers, to activate the emergency systems. Instead, he stood his ground and did something that silenced every observer in the arena. He spoke to the creature. "Easy," Jake said in a calm, steady voice. "I'm not a threat. I'm not prey. I'm just curious about you." The Nexus Stalker stopped so close to Jake that he could feel the heat radiating from its body. Its claws were inches from his chest, its massive head looming over him. But it had stopped. Jake could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. But he kept his voice level. That was impressive. "You're fast, powerful, everything the report said. But you stopped. You're not a mindless killer, are you?" The creature's eyes narrowed, studying Jake with an intensity that was almost physical. Jake could see intelligence behind those glowing orbs. calculation and evaluation happening at a speed that matched the creature's physical reflexes. Carefully, Jake reached into his pocket for the sound device. The movement caused the Nexus Stalker to tense, but it didn't attack. Jake activated the device and produced a low, rumbling tone that he had heard the creature make during its captivity. The effect was immediate. The Nexus Stalker's aggressive posture relaxed slightly, and it made a sound in response, a deeper rumble that Jake felt as much as heard. "You recognize that sound, don't you?" Jake said, adjusting the device to produce a different tone. "This one means curiosity, and this one means no threat." The creature responded to each sound with vocalizations of its own. Jake realized that they were having a conversation, primitive but real. The Nexus Stalker was answering his attempts at communication with sounds that seemed to carry meaning. The arena had gone completely silent. Even the background hum of the station's life support systems seemed muted. Every being in the observation areas was watching the impossible sight of a human having a conversation with one of the galaxy's most feared predators. Jake took a small step forward, and the Nexus Stalker allowed it. Another step, and another, until Jake was close enough to reach out and touch the creature's armored hide. "May I?" Jake asked, raising his hand slowly. The Nexus Stalker considered the gesture for a moment, then lowered its massive head until Jake's palm rested against its snout. The contact sent a shock through the observers, and Jake heard several more beings faint in the gallery above. But the creature didn't attack. Instead, it leaned into Jake's touch like a cat seeking affection. Its eyes half closed, and it produced a sound that Jake's device translated as contentment. "You've been alone for so long," Jake said softly, running his hand along the creature's jaw. "No one to talk to, no one who understood that you're more than just a killer." For the next hour, Jake worked with the Nexus Stalker in front of the stunned audience. He taught it simple commands using combinations of sounds and gestures. He demonstrated its problem-solving abilities by presenting it with puzzles that it solved with obvious intelligence. Most remarkably, he showed that the creature could learn to interact safely with others. When Lucy cautiously entered the arena, at Jake's invitation, the Nexus Stalker allowed her to approach under Jake's guidance. "It understands the concept of introduction," Jake explained to the audience as Lucy nervously touched the creature's side. "I've told it that she's a friend, and it's accepting her presence based on my vouching for her." The demonstration reached its climax when Jake asked the Nexus Stalker to perform a series of complex movements that required trust and cooperation. The creature followed his directions perfectly, even allowing Jake to guide it through obstacles that would have been impossible. Without complete mutual understanding, when the demonstration finally ended, the arena erupted in chaos. Some observers were cheering, others were arguing loudly, and several were demanding immediate access to Jake's research notes. Dr. Creason sat in stunned silence, his compound eyes reflecting the arena lights as he processed what he had witnessed. Jake stood with his hand resting on the Nexus Stalker's neck, both of them breathing hard from the intensity of the past hour. The creature had not only refrained from harming him, but had actively cooperated in ways that no one had thought possible. "Well," Jake said to Lucy, who was still pale but smiling, "I think that went better than expected." The Nexus Stalker rumbled in agreement, a sound that Jake now understood meant satisfaction and approval. In the space of 1 hour, everything the galactic community thought it knew about predator species had been turned upside down, and somewhere in the audience, betting pools across dozens of worlds were paying out winnings to the few beings who had been crazy enough to bet on the human from the Deathworld. Dr. Creason finally found his voice, speaking into the communication system. The days following the demonstration were unlike anything Jake Morrison had ever experienced. News of the successful interaction with the Nexus Stalker spread through the galactic network faster than light travel. Within hours, Jake's name was being mentioned on worlds he had never heard of. Within days, he was receiving communication requests from universities, research institutions, and governments across the galaxy. Jake found himself sitting in a conference room that had been hastily prepared for what the university administration was calling emergency academic proceedings. Representatives from dozens of worlds had arrived at Kepler 7 station, either in person or through holographic projection. The room buzzed with excited conversations in languages that Jake's translator struggled to keep up with. Dr. Creason sat at the head of the conference table, looking uncomfortable in a way that Jake had never seen before. The Chitauri's mandibles clicked constantly, and his forearms moved in nervous patterns as he shuffled through data pads and official documents. Dr. Morrison, Dr. Creason began, his voice carrying through the room's translation system. In light of recent events, the university administration finds itself in the position of needing to reconsider several fundamental assumptions about xenobiological classification and interspecies communication protocols. Professor Veltar, Jake's original instructor, chimed in with her musical voice. The implications of your successful interaction with the Nexus Stalker extend far beyond academic curiosity. If such a dangerous predator can be communicated with and managed through understanding rather than force, then perhaps our entire approach to first contact situations needs to be reviewed. Jake looked around the room at the assembled beings. Some watched him with obvious admiration, others with curiosity, and a few with what he was beginning to recognize as fear. Not fear of him personally, but fear of what his success meant for their understanding of the universe. Dr. Morrison, said a tall luminary, whose energy form flickered with excited patterns. My government has authorized me to extend an formal invitation for you to establish a research facility on our home world. We have several species that have been classified as too dangerous for direct study. Your methods could change everything. Similar offers began pouring in from around the room. Research grants, teaching positions, consulting contracts, and requests for cooperation that would have made Jake wealthy beyond imagination. But as the voices grew louder and more insistent, Jake found himself thinking about the Nexus Stalker, alone in its holding cell, while everyone debated what to do with the knowledge his demonstration had provided. Thank you all for your generous offers, Jake said, standing up to address the room. But before we talk about future research, I think we need to address what happens to my friend. The room fell quiet. Several beings looked confused by Jake's terminology. Your friend? Asked Dr. Creason. The Nexus Stalker, the being I worked with yesterday. It has a name now, by the way. During our interaction, it indicated a preference for certain sounds. I've been calling it Rex, and it seems to approve. Jake could see the discomfort on several faces around the room. The idea of naming the creature, of thinking of it as an individual rather than a specimen, clearly disturbed some of the assembled academics. Dr. Morrison, said a Zephian representative, whose crystal body was glowing with agitated light patterns. While your demonstration was remarkable, we must remember that the Nexus Stalker remains a dangerous predator. Appropriate containment and study protocols must be maintained. Containment? Jake felt anger rising in his voice. You're talking about keeping an intelligent being in solitary confinement for the rest of its life. That's not research. That's torture. The room erupted in debate. Some beings argued that the creature's dangerous nature justified continued containment, while others suggested that Jake's success proved such measures were unnecessary. The argument continued for nearly an hour before Jake finally had enough. Stop, Jake said loudly, his voice cutting through the alien chatter. All of you are talking about Rex like it's not here, like it can't hear you through the building's communication system. You're making decisions about a sentient being's life without including it in the conversation. Jake activated his datapad and opened a communication channel to the holding area where Rex was being kept. the large screen at the front of the sea. Conference room lit up with an image of the creature, who immediately perked up when it saw Jake. "Rex," Jake said, using the combination of sounds and tones he had developed during their interaction. "These beings want to decide what happens. To you. Do you understand what's happening?" The Nexus Stalker responded with a series of vocalizations that Jake's device translated into patterns of meaning. The creature was frustrated, lonely, and confused about why it was being kept isolated after a successful communication. "It wants to go home," Jake announced to the stunned conference room. "It has family on Xerion Prime, a mate and offspring that it hasn't seen in over a year." The revelation sent another wave of shock through the assembled beings. The idea that the feared Nexus Stalker was not just intelligent, but had emotional connections and family relationships challenged every assumption they had made about the species. Professor Veltar's crystalline form was glowing with rapid light patterns that Jake had learned indicated deep thought. "Dr. Morrison, are you suggesting that we simply release a dangerous predator back to its home world?" "I'm suggesting that we treat an intelligent being with the respect it deserves," Jake replied. "Rex has shown no aggressive behavior toward anyone who approaches it with understanding rather than fear. The dangerous incidents from the past were likely the result of the creature defending itself against what it perceived as threats." Over the following weeks, Jake worked with a team of linguists and xenobiologists to develop a more sophisticated communication system with Rex. What they discovered revolutionized the understanding of Nexus Stalker society. The species was not just intelligent, but had a complex social structure, advanced problem-solving abilities, and a form of culture that included art, music, and storytelling. Rex shared information about its home world that no remote observation had ever captured, describing family groups, territorial agreements, and even what appeared to be religious or spiritual practices. More importantly, Rex provided insight into why previous encounters between Nexus Stalkers and Galactic Explorers had been so violent. The species was naturally territorial and protective, but they were also capable of peaceful interaction when approached properly. The problem was that most explorers had arrived with weapons and defensive barriers, sending signals that the Nexus Stalkers interpreted as hostile intent. Jake's daily sessions with Rex became a spectacle that drew observers from across the galaxy. The creature learned to recognize dozens of different beings and could communicate basic concepts with several species. It showed particular interest in the Zephyrians, whose crystal bodies reminded it of rock formations on its home world that held spiritual significance. The breakthrough came when Rex began teaching Jake about Nexus Stalker communication methods. The creature's species used a combination of vocalizations, scent markers, and body language that was far more sophisticated than anyone had realized. They had their own names for things, their own ways of describing the world, and their own perspective on the galaxy around them. "This changes everything," said Dr. Kreesan during one of their research sessions. The Chitauri had become one of Jake's strongest supporters, amazed by the depth of intelligence that Rex displayed. "We've been classifying species based on their physical capabilities rather than their mental capacities." 3 months after the demonstration, the Galactic Council voted to establish new protocols for contact with species previously classified as too dangerous for interaction. Jake was appointed as the director of the new Department of Interspecies Understanding, with a mandate to develop communication methods for species that had been written off as hostile. Rex became the department's first official consultant, working with Jake to train other researchers in proper approach techniques. The creature seemed to enjoy its new role, showing patience with nervous students and enthusiasm for solving communication puzzles. The day finally came when Rex was scheduled to return home. A special transport had been prepared, not an armored prison ship, but a comfortable vessel designed for an honored passenger. Representatives from Xerion Prime had arrived to escort Rex home and to establish formal diplomatic relations with the galactic community. Jake stood in the docking bay, watching the loading procedures. Rex had grown quieter over the past few days, and Jake could sense the creature's excitement about seeing its family again. "You're going to miss each other, aren't you?" said Lucy Brennan, who had become Jake's research partner and closest friend. "At the university." "We'll see each other again," Jake replied. "The Xerion Prime government has invited me to visit their world and study Nexus Stalker Society in its natural environment. Apparently, Rex has been telling them stories about the funny human who talks to predators." Rex approached Jake for their final goodbye. The creature lowered its massive head and made the sound that Jake had learned meant gratitude and friendship. Jake placed his hand on Rex's snout one last time,